It's time for the roundtable, and this week in a town known for petty bickering, often blocking sensible policy, we saw some especially nasty back and forth over trade policy. What does this low-budget version of Heather's mean for you? And this week also, what is the Pepco-Exelon proposed merger standing up to scrutiny? Joining us now to tackle both topics, Peter Morici, professor of economics at the University of Maryland Smith School of Business, and Josh Boak, economics reporter for the Associated Press. Gentlemen, I'm stumbling even thinking about it because it's stumbling right now. Let's start with Pepco Exelon. City council members led by Morici saying it's a deal that's going to benefit Exelon and benefit Pepco shareholders but hurt consumers. Peter, Pepco Exelon proposed merger, good or bad for Washington area consumers?
I don't know that it's going to be bad for consumers, but there certainly will be fewer jobs. The purposes of these mergers is to create efficiencies, and efficiencies mean laying people off. Bureaucrats, government politicians, they don't like that. Whether jobs are needed or not, they want to keep them going. And it's unfortunate, but progress requires that Pepco become more efficient, and Exelon will do it to them.
Josh, I'm passing right over, going straight to you. Small businesses also have bills that they have to pay, and the complaint is that Exelon has overvalued Pepco beyond its assets, and that to make back the money they're going to pay to buy Pepco, they're going to have to charge higher rates. They're promising to hold off on job cuts for 2 years. They're not making any promises on rates. Bad for consumers and bad for local businesses?
It's not just about rates. It's also about solar panels. Exelon has an extensive amount of nuclear plants. Those rates have to pay for those plants. We've seen more and more D.C. residents and Maryland residents who would be affected by this deal wanting to move to a distributive grid and using solar energy. If Exelon limits that, and that's the key thing, if Exelon limits that, you're going to have a lot of unhappy people.
How would Exelon limit that? Through legislation?
Well, a lot of utilities will say we can't compete if you move to this distributed grid model because we have all these capital expenditures we have to make to keep our plants updated.
Peter, I want to jump ahead to trade policy because you get irate when talking about China manipulating its currency and other issues, but you don't seem to take me on in the way that Barack Obama took on Elizabeth Warren and vice versa. She had her allies saying the president was being sexist and saying she didn't know what she was talking about when it came to trade policy, when frankly I thought he was kind of right. What
that
happened?
shows you how desperate Elizabeth Warren and her handlers were, because she's flat out wrong. A trade agreement with our Asian partners makes sense for America. It's correct, as Chuck Schumer says, to want issues like currency addressed, and he's working in that direction. Liz Warren, that's different. She wants no trade under any circumstances. It's like the D.C. City Council with Exelon. There's nothing that would make her happy. And what is starting to come out is just how irrational that woman is.
Well, okay, so Josh, I think there would be some people that would disagree with that, but it doesn't seem to make sense to argue that trade policy would kill all jobs and business in the U.S. when we know that it in fact can have the opposite impact. What happened that things got so nasty in this fight, and where are we headed next?
So first of all, we're flying blind without any facts, right? No one's allowed to read this policy unless you have the proper clearance and you're able to look at the negotiated deal.
But come on, they don't need that.
But hear me out on this, because this is really important. So then when everyone makes projections on jobs created or jobs lost,
right?
They really, I mean, anyone would do this, right? A monkey throwing darts. And so when you don't have the facts,
that free trade agreements can be.
When you don't have the facts, emotions take over.
President sexist. You have to be smoking dope. And she's not doing that.
Senator Warren, I am not accusing you or Sherrod Brown or any of the others who teamed up on your side.
There was an or.
Even though it is legal now in the district.
Or you're behaving very irrationally. And unfortunately, on the Democratic side, it reduced down to that level. It was very remindful of some of the
But where I would challenge Peter is, I would say, if anything, Warren, Sherrod Brown, they're all behaving very rationally with regard to their interests.
True. Okay, so I want to get to another point.
How is it Massachusetts' interest to nix this trade agreement? I'm sorry, the real areas where there are difficulties are places like Michigan, where the automobile industry will be significantly threatened by a deal.
Sherrod Brown is part of Ohio.
No, but I'm saying, I mean, Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts, is threatened by trade? Come on.
I want to get past Elizabeth Warren because this is about bigger things than that. Josh, explain to me why, though, she says this could also even threaten things like the Consumer Protection Bureau when it is fast-track authority for an up or down vote on a trade agreement. What's that got to do with these other government agencies that she says could be threatened by giving the president more authority?
Her fear isn't in the fast-track authority. It's in what might be in the trade deal that would allow companies to exploit basically the trade agreement to get rid of aspects of Dodd-Frank.
They have made these kinds of claims over and over again. They made that claim about NAFTA, and it didn't happen. The reality is trade agreements do constrain all of the governments involved. I know something about this in terms of their domestic regulatory structures, but they do it in a way that simply says you can't discriminate against foreigners. You can't treat them less favorably than you do domestic actors.
I got to close this because I know something about this too. I worked in the Senate Finance Committee legislation that created NAFTA, and I worked in the Clinton administration when we got fast track authority. We can be protectionist when we need to be as politicians, and we can be open-minded when we want to be, but economic policy is not always best left to politicians. Let's agree with that. We got a pop quiz right after the break, so stay tuned. We'll have much more. Welcome back. It is a tragedy that has also turned into a political debate. So for this pop quiz, on a serious note, I want to ask both of our panelists, Josh, Peter, lots of debate right now in Congress over funding for Amtrak. Democrats say more funding for Amtrak would have prevented these kinds of accidents. Republicans say it had nothing to do with that. Josh, more funding for Amtrak, will it provide more safety? Yes, if Congress prioritizes those projects that would make riders and engineers better off. Peter Morici.
The reality is the Northeast Corridor turns a profit of $500 million a year. That money gets spent elsewhere to please congressmen. If the money was kept in the Northeast Corridor where the profits are made, they could make all of the investments for safety that are necessary. Thank you both for joining us, and thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next week for Washington Business Report.